They waited until I was strapped to machines, too weak to lift my own hand. While I lay in that hospital bed, drifting between painkillers and prayers, they were changing the locks. My own son, blood of my blood, forged my signature like it was nothing. His wife? She took my house keys with a smile and started posting my furniture online the same day. They called me a burden, an old man in the way. When I was discharged, I returned not to my home, but to a stranger's address. My name was gone, my belongings gone, my place in their lives gone. They thought I'd just disappear, but I was never dying. I was watching, and when the time came, I made sure they lost everything they took from me. And more, now they sleep in parking lots, jobless, penniless, forgotten, and I'm still here. Like, subscribe, share this with someone who needs to see it. Tell me where you are watching. From I always thought betrayal would come with raised voices, slammed doors, maybe a fist through drywall. But that's not how it happened. My betrayal arrived quietly, dressed in polite smiles and soft reassurances. It didn't scream. It signed papers. I was admitted to the hospital in early November. Nothing dramatic, a bad infection gone worse. Some complications with my lungs. A few days of tests turned into a week of machines and oxygen tubes. I was groggy most of the time, not entirely sure what day it was or who had come to visit, but I remember seeing my son Ryan standing by my bed one afternoon. That part's clear. He smiled and told me not to worry. He and Kim, his wife, would handle everything at the house. He used those exact words, everything. I remember feeling a strange weight in my chest that had nothing to do with the infection. Still, I nodded. What else could I do? I was lying in a gown, tubes in my arm, heart monitor beeping like a countdown. Ryan was my only son. After his mother died, it was just the two of us. I raised him in that house. Every beam and tile had a story. He knew what it meant to me, or so I thought. Kim visited the next day with soup and a gentle tone. She sat by my bedside and told me how hard Ryan was working to keep everything afloat. "We're doing this for you," she said, tucking the blanket around my feet. "So you can rest and heal." I tried to thank her. My voice cracked, and she squeezed my hand like a nurse would. I felt like a child. The papers started showing up on the fourth day. A nurse brought them in, told me I needed to sign off on some documents to release authority for utilities and home care. She didn't seem to know the details, just that Ryan had dropped them off, pre-signed. I was still disoriented from pain meds. My vision blurred, and I remember asking, "Is this for insurance?" The nurse shrugged. I signed. A week later, I was discharged early. Against medical advice, actually. "Your family requested it," the nurse said, avoiding eye contact. I stepped out into the cold air with a paper bag of prescriptions and an Uber voucher. That was my first clue. When I arrived home, something was off immediately. The porch lights were different. New bulbs, colder. The garden was trimmed but sterile, the bird feeder gone. I reached into my coat pocket for the key I'd carried for 30 years. It didn't fit. I stood there, bag in hand, still wheezing from the hospital stay. I rang the bell. No answer. Tried again. Nothing. Then I noticed the doorbell camera. It was new, and it blinked red. I called Ryan straight to voicemail. I texted Kim. No reply. I stood there for almost 20 minutes until the neighbor across the street, Helen, sweet woman in her 70s, came out and said gently, "Harold, they told me you were staying with relatives." I wasn't. Eventually, I called a cab and checked into a cheap motel off the freeway. The bed sagged in the middle. The air smelled like mildew. I stared at the ceiling all night, turning over every conversation, every trust I'd handed over without hesitation. The next day, I went to the courthouse. I asked for copies of any filings related to my property. The clerk gave me a thin folder. Inside were 3 documents. One was the house deed, now under Ryan's name. Another was a medical affidavit stating I was of diminished capacity during hospitalization. The third was a financial transfer request, giving Ryan temporary access to all my accounts for care purposes. All 3 bore my signature. I remember staring at the paper, heart racing. My signature was real, but I didn't remember signing that. It dawned on me slowly, painfully, that while I had been drifting between fevers and IV drips, they had stripped me of everything. Legally, neatly, no confrontation, Just execution? I went to the bank that afternoon. My card had been disabled. The teller looked sympathetic but firm. You'll need to speak with the account manager. There's a power of attorney on file, I laughed. It came out cracked and bitter. Of course there is, I said. That night I sat in the motel room, lights off, breathing shallow. My name had been erased from my own home. My belongings? Gone. My future? Hijacked. I thought of my wife, of how proud she would have been to see Ryan grow up. I wondered what she would have said if she knew. He'd sell his father's dignity for a key code and a fast track to equity. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I planned if they thought. The old man would just fade quietly. They forgot who built that house. The motel smelled like old rain and cheaper regrets. I spent my first night staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering how many other people had been dumped here after being discarded by the ones they trusted most. I thought I was different. I thought I raised a better man. Turns out I raised a better thief. But grief is a short-term guest when you're angry enough. And that anger wasn't loud. It was quiet, cold, methodical. The kind of anger that doesn't want apologies. It wants correction. So I got to work. First, the basics. What exactly had they done and how? I walked into the county recorder's office that morning like I still had a house key in my pocket. I asked for property records under my name. The clerk was polite but distracted. Are you transferring, buying, or contesting ownership? Let's just say I'm checking who's sleeping in my bed, I said. A few clicks and keystrokes later, she slid a manila folder across the counter. Inside, the updated deed. My name scratched out. Ryan scrawled in. It looked like a child forging his father's permission slip. The signature date? The third day of my hospital stay. The day I was sedated for a scan and drifting in and out of lucidity. That meant they had the forms ready. They didn't wait for a diagnosis. They were waiting for an opening. Beside the deed was a durable power of attorney form. Signed, notarized, witnessed, all legally binding, and all bullshit. Next, I pulled every contact I still had. I called my old banker, Sam, from back when people still shook hands and remembered birthdays. He had retired 6 months ago but still remembered me. They froze your accounts? He asked, furious. Cited medical risk and potential abuse. Irony, huh? Yeah. Real funny. He helped me start a paper trail. I requested official transaction logs. I looked for withdrawals I didn't recognize. There were dozens necessary expenses, like property staging and utility transfers. They used my money to make the house theirs. They were cleaning me out with a vacuum smile. I wasn't going to fight fire with fire. I was going to fight it with proof. Cold, irrefutable, chronological proof. Back at the motel, I opened an old email account I hadn't touched in years. It still had access to the login for the home security system. Ryan must have forgotten to change it. Idiot. There were saved video clips, 30-second motion-activated files. I watched one. Kim, in workout gear, dragging boxes labeled Donate. Another. Ryan, laughing with friends as they uncorked the bottle of bourbon I had been saving since 1991. I downloaded them all. Created folders. Labeled everything, dates, times, contents. This wasn't just theft. It was desecration. I still needed legal firepower. That's when I called Mara Jenkins. We weren't close, but she used to attend the same estate planning seminars I once led before retirement. She answered on the second ring. Harold, heard you were in the hospital. I was, I said. Now I'm preparing for war. We met in a strip mall cafe that hadn't updated its decor since Reagan. I laid it all out. She didn't interrupt. Just nodded slowly as I showed her documents, timelines, photos, power of attorney granted under sedation. You've got grounds. Possible fraud. Definitely elder exploitation, she said. But we'll need more. Witnesses, medical logs, proof of incapacity. I've got that too, I said. I remember everything. We filed a petition to pause all asset transfers until a full review could be conducted. She called in favors from former colleagues. We subpoenaed the hospital's medical records. My attending physician confirmed what I already knew. I was not of sound mind or memory the day I signed those forms. Mara found inconsistencies in the notary's log. Turns out the woman who stamped the documents had notarized 5 separate items across 3 counties in a single hour. Sloppy work, easy to question in court. Meanwhile, I returned to the neighborhood, not to the house, but across the street to Helen. She opened the door, startled, but softened immediately. Oh, Harold. I didn't know where you'd gone. Do you remember the night the movers came? She nodded. Around midnight, they backed into the driveway.
Ryan said you were moving to a home. I laughed.
I am now. A motel near the airport, she gasped. Would you be willing to write a statement? She didn't even hesitate. Absolutely. The walls were closing in. For them. I could feel it. Ryan must have sensed it too. He texted me a day later. We were trying to help you. Don't ruin everything. I didn't reply. I screenshotted it instead. Kim called Mara's office 3 times. The third time she left a voicemail threatening to escalate things legally. Mara just forwarded it to our evidence folder. They weren't being careful anymore. They were reacting. And reactive people make mistakes. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine, I was dragging their lies into the sunlight, one receipt at a time, and when the reckoning came, it wouldn't be loud, it would be surgical. Court isn't like the movies. There's no dramatic music, no last-minute confessions. Just squeaky chairs, buzzing fluorescent lights, and too much paperwork. But on the morning I walked into that courthouse, it felt like every wall was watching me. Not because I was important, but because they assumed I was the one losing. An old man dragging a battered briefcase, wearing an off-the-rack jacket and hospital shoes. I probably looked like I was there to ask for directions, but I wasn't lost. I was here to ruin 2 people who thought I would never fight back. Ryan and Kim arrived 30 minutes late. Of course they did. She wore designer boots. He wore smugness like cologne. They smiled at the clerk, made small talk with their attorney. Kim even waved at the stenographer like this was some brunch court sitcom. Their lawyer was a well-fed man with sharp cuffs and no soul behind his eyes. He was the kind of guy who could say elderly burden without blinking. I didn't hate him. He was just doing a job, but my son. I had no such courtesy for him. The judge entered. Mara leaned toward me and whispered, "This is where we flip the table." We opened with the motion to reverse the deed transfer on grounds of fraudulent coercion and incapacitated consent. Mara outlined the timeline: hospitalization, sedation, medical logs confirming my compromised state. She presented footage of Ryan entering the hospital with a notary, unauthorized during restricted hours. We included the doctor's statement, the nurse's logs, the hospital security timestamps. Then we dropped the big one. Exhibit D, the notary's license log, showing she notarized documents in 3 different counties within 90 minutes. It proved what we already suspected. She was rubber stamping favors, likely for cash, and didn't witness a damn thing. Ryan's attorney tried to object. The judge waved it off. Then came the screenshots, the security camera footage from the house showing boxes being removed while I was still in the hospital. Labels marked Donate, Nicelle, and Old Man's Room, my bourbon, my books, Kim posing for a real estate photographer. Mara moved like a surgeon, cutting line by line through their defense. Every document they presented, we countered. Every justification they gave, we dismantled. But the best weapon we had wasn't paper, it was silence. After an hour of evidence, the judge turned to me. "Mr. Gaines, would you like to make a statement?" I stood. My knees weren't steady, but my voice was. Clear, controlled. I built that home with my bare hands. I paid every mortgage. Buried my wife in the backyard rose garden she planted herself. That house isn't just mine. It's everything I've ever protected. I paused. Looked at Ryan. And my son didn't steal it because he needed to. He stole it because he thought I wouldn't stop him. Kim rolled her eyes. The judge noticed. I signed documents under morphine. I was sedated, confused, and under medical duress. My signature isn't consent. It's evidence of betrayal. I sat down. The room was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then the judge spoke. "Motion to pause further financial activity is granted. Preliminary injunction approved. We'll reconvene in 10 days for formal review." Translation: they couldn't sell the house. They couldn't touch the accounts. Their game was frozen. Ryan's lawyer looked frustrated. Kim whispered something sharp in his ear. He didn't reply. Outside the courtroom, Ryan caught up to me in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice low. I looked him in the eyes and saw something I hadn't seen since he was 12. Fear. "You didn't just take my house," I said. "You buried me alive and called it a favor." He looked like he might say something, but didn't. Just turned and walked back to his wife, who was already halfway down the stairs. That evening, Mara and I sat in her office reviewing the case. She asked me if I felt vindicated. No, I said. Not yet, because this wasn't about getting my house back. Not really. It was about turning their own arrogance into the very weapon that would undo them, and we'd only just made the first cut. They didn't. Stay quiet for long, the court ruling had frozen their access to my accounts, their control of the house, and their ability to sell, lease, or upgrade anything that once belonged to me. Their high-rise illusion started cracking, and when people like Ryan and Kim start to feel their walls crumble, they don't reflect. They retaliate. The first blow was subtle. A story that popped up in a small local paper. Elderly man's mental health crisis sparks family battle over property. The article was unsigned. No clear source. But every quote pointed one direction, that I was unstable, that I was confused, losing track of time, lashing out at the only family willing to care for him. The headline never used my name, but it didn't have to. They'd leaked just enough to draw blood without leaving fingerprints. Next came the social media campaign. Kim started posting vague, weepy updates on her Facebook. Sometimes helping someone means making hard choices. Mental illness runs deep in families. Please, be kind. Ryan followed up with a carefully staged photo of the two of them standing in front of my house. Their house now, with a caption that read, "Fighting for what's right, even when it's hard. Husker family first." They were painting me as the villain. The sad, delusional old man trying to tear down the people, sacrificing so much for his care. And it worked. People started calling me. Old friends asked if I was okay. Distant relatives emailed, offering to mediate. One neighbor even dropped by the motel to say, "Harold, are you sure you're remembering things right?" I didn't blame them. That's how con artists work. They don't just steal what's yours. They rewrite the story so that when you scream for help, everyone sees a crazy man howling at the moon. But here's the thing about stories. They're still bound by evidence. And I had plenty. While Ryan and Kim were busy performing online sainthood, I kept collecting. Mara and I had built a digital war chest. Bank records, forged signatures, security footage, audio from their phone calls, even emails Kim forgot to delete from an old shared Dropbox account. She had used it once to forward an estimated renovation budget to a contractor, referring to me as the old man upstairs who doesn't know we own it now. That phrase would come back to haunt her. We also found 2 formal complaints filed by former contractors, who'd been stiff during their rushed house makeover. Both were eager to testify. Still, the public story needed correcting, and fast. Mara suggested a quiet leak of our own, so we sent one email, just one, to a retired journalist Mara knew from law school, someone who hated rich kids, influencer culture, and the idea of power of attorney being used as a weapon. A week later, an article appeared under the title, "He thought they were taking care of his house. They were taking everything." This one had names. It had receipts. It had screen captures and quotes. It painted the full picture of what had happened to me. The timing of the hospitalization, the documents signed under sedation, the way my belongings were boxed up and sold within days of my medical crisis. It included a photo of me standing beside the bench where I used to read in my backyard, captioned simply, "I built this with my wife." It went viral. Fast. And that's when Ryan and Kim truly started to sweat. The comments turned. Friends unfollowed. Someone left a 1-star review on their wedding photographer's website with the line, "Photographed a couple of thieves." Their names started trending, not in the way they wanted. They went silent. No more posts. No more family first hashtags. Just quiet deletion. But the damage wasn't done yet. Because while they were focused on image control, I was focused on their foundation. The one they didn't know I could still reach. Kim had quietly taken out a short-term bridge loan against the house during the period they thought the deed was theirs. She used it to fund some of the renovations and pay off a few private debts. But when the court froze the property, the lender came calling. She tried to dodge. The lender filed notice. Now they owed money on a house they no longer legally controlled. And they couldn't refinance, because the asset wasn't officially theirs anymore. They were boxed in, publicly humiliated, privately crumbling. And me? I was just getting started because the court date was coming, and I wasn't walking in there just to win my house back. I was walking in to make sure they had nowhere left to run. The courtroom was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the stone walls, maybe it was the silence, or maybe it was the fact that Ryan and Kim no longer walked in with the confidence of thieves who thought they'd gotten away with it. They looked smaller now, not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, reputationally. Even their lawyer seemed deflated, his once crisp suit jacket now rumpled at the edges. The shine was gone. They took seats across from me at the plaintiff's table. I didn't look away. This wasn't about intimidation. It was about confrontation. They needed to see the man they tried to bury, alive, focused, and walking into this room to end what they started. The judge entered, and the clerk called the session into order. The second half of the hearing began. Mara opened with what she called the death spiral, a chronological breakdown of their deception, showing how each lie required another. Each forgery opened the door to fraud. Each manipulation fed into an illegal transfer of property. She introduced medical records first. Clear documentation that I was under sedation and mentally impaired at the time the power of attorney was allegedly signed. Nurses' logs, doctor's notes, even my vital stats, unstable blood pressure, intermittent lucidity. Then came the notary. We showed that the same notary had signed off on 5 legal documents across 4 counties that same afternoon. Impossible by travel time alone. The court reviewed her disciplinary record. Suspicious past conduct. The judge's eyebrows went up. We introduced hospital hallway security footage showing Ryan and Kim entering my room with blank forms in hand, staying for less than 10 minutes, and leaving with signed documents. "Mr. Gaines," the judge said, "were you aware of what you were signing that day?" I stood. "No, Your Honor, I couldn't even tell you what month it was. I thought they were insurance papers. I trusted them." "Do you believe your son and his wife took advantage of your condition?" I looked Ryan in the eye. "I don't believe it. I know it." There was no outburst, just silence. The kind that swells when a room is starting to understand it's watching a reckoning. Next, Mara introduced our financial trail. Screenshots of my accounts being accessed within 24 hours of the power of attorney going into effect. Withdrawals, transfers, payments to a private contractor listed under a business Kim ran, which had never been disclosed to me. Renovations, camera systems, interior decorators, all funded from my accounts. Receipts, timestamps, proof. Then the kicker. "Your Honor," Mara said, "we'd also like to submit evidence showing that the defendants misrepresented the ownership of the house in order to obtain a loan, which they subsequently defaulted on. The bank has filed notice of lien, and the debt now exceeds the equity in the property." The judge blinked. "They took a loan against the house without full ownership?" "Yes, sir, and then spent the money on aesthetic upgrades while continuing to mislead financial institutions. That's when their lawyer tried to regroup. He objected, claimed confusion, miscommunication, misunderstanding of responsibilities. But the wind was gone from his voice. Even he could feel it. The story was collapsing. Kim whispered frantically to him. Ryan just stared at the floor. Mara stood one final time. "Your Honor," she said, "we are not asking for punishment. We are asking for restoration. Mr. Gaines didn't just lose his home, he lost his sense of safety, his dignity, and the final years of his life were nearly defined by betrayal. What was done to him wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coordinated, callous exploitation of illness and trust. And we're here to take it all back." The judge nodded slowly. "I've heard enough." He took a deep breath, shuffled his papers, then read his ruling. The deed transfer was voided. The power of attorney was nullified. All assets were to be returned. Ryan and Kim were ordered to vacate the house within 72 hours. Financial restitution for unauthorized withdrawals was demanded. A formal investigation into the loan application was ordered. And, at my request, the judge referred the case to Elder Protection Services for criminal review. The room was still. I didn't smile. I didn't pump my fist. I just sat down and breathed. It was done. Ryan didn't look at me. Kim didn't speak. They were no longer characters in a performance, just two people whose lies had finally cost them everything. Outside the courthouse, a few reporters asked questions. I didn't speak to them. I just walked. I passed the park where I used to take Ryan when he was a boy. We used to sit under the same oak tree every Saturday, share sandwiches, talk about the stars. He used to call me his hero. I wonder what he calls me now. That night I returned to the house, my house. It smelled like paint and someone else's perfume. I opened every window, turned on every light, walked barefoot through every room. No one could take it from me now, and somewhere across town Ryan and Kim were packing bags. Their story was over. Mine was just starting again. They left in silence. No tearful goodbyes, no dramatic scenes in the driveway, not even a final knock at the door. Ryan and Kim were gone before dawn, slipping out of my house like two strangers who'd been caught sleeping in the wrong bed. I watched from the upstairs window. Kim tossed a suitcase into the back of their dented SUV, not the new one they used to flaunt on social media. That one had been repossessed. This one was borrowed, maybe rented. I didn't care. Ryan stood at the edge of the lawn, staring at the house like it still owed him something. It didn't. The law had spoken. The locks had been changed. Their reign was over. When they drove off, the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was something deeper, a stillness earned through fire, like the air after a storm that almost took everything but didn't. I stepped outside barefoot and stood on the porch. This house felt different now. Not because of the fresh paint or the overturned furniture I'd eventually put back in place, but because I had taken it back. Not just the walls, but the meaning of it, the memories, the history, the identity. This wasn't just my house. It was me. For the first few days after the ruling, I moved slowly. Not from age, but from reflection. I touched every surface. The old banister I carved with my initials and my late wife's. The pantry door Ryan used to draw on with crayon. The loose floorboard under the guest room that once held our emergency savings. They tried to erase all of it. And now they had nothing. I heard through Mara that they were staying in a motel across town. The kind with paper-thin walls and sticky floors. The kind that smells like damp cigarettes and regret. Kim's job let her go after the news broke. Ryan couldn't refinance the car. Their credit was wrecked. Their reputations even more so. One neighbor told me they saw Kim crying in the back of a pharmacy parking lot, holding her phone like it was her last lifeline. Another said Ryan had been asking friends for short-term loans, pretending it was for business reasons. No one believed them anymore. The public had turned. They tried to weaponize my age, my illness, my vulnerability. But I made sure their cruelty was recorded in permanent ink. And still, I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. Just clarity. This wasn't revenge in the way people like to imagine it. No fireworks, no last-minute showdown in the rain. It was quieter. It was justice that hummed under the skin, not screamed from the rooftops. And I realized something else, too. I wasn't just fighting for my house. I was fighting for every parent who sacrificed without expectation. Every elder who handed over their keys, their passwords, their peace, thinking love was enough to protect them. I joined a community advocacy group not long after. We met in the back of a church once a week. People just like me. Some had lost homes. Others were still fighting. One man, Charles, had been conned by his own daughter. Another, Irene, had her life insurance rerouted by a caregiver. We sat in that circle, not out of bitterness, but out of survival. I shared my story on a panel. No names, just facts. People listened. Some cried. One woman came up to me after and said, "You gave me the courage to look into my father's will." Turns out his accountant had been bleeding him dry for years. I nodded. Get a good lawyer, and don't wait. Back at home, things settled. I replaced the stolen photos on the walls, ordered a replica of the bourbon bottle Ryan drank just to put it on the shelf again, untouched this time. I planted a new rose bush in the backyard, right next to the one my wife had loved. That one had been trampled during renovations. I didn't mourn it. I replaced it. She would have liked that. Sometimes I still get calls from reporters asking for updates. I ignore most of them. Let the story end here. Let them wonder what became of Ryan and Kim. Let their names fade while mine stays rooted. Some nights I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, listening to the wind brush against the house. I think about legacy, not money, not deeds, not even the bricks and wood of the home itself. Legacy is the truth you leave behind. Mine is simple. They tried to destroy me quietly, but I rebuilt louder. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the stakes. And if you ever find yourself staring down betrayal from someone who once called you family, remember, justice doesn't always knock loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, but it does come. If this story struck a nerve, if you've ever trusted someone who turned around and used that trust as a weapon, you're not alone. Like this video if you believe justice isn't always loud, but it should be permanent. Subscribe for more true confession revenge stories like this, where silence meets reckoning. Share this with someone who needs to know that even when you're down, you're not done. And comment below, have you ever seen someone betray their own family? For power or money? What would you have done in Harold's place? Let us know where you're watching from. We're listening.